The amount of damage a unit can deal depends on the weapon it uses. Giving a mainline unit the same weapon as an elite unit, and they would deal the same amount of damage. However, the units also have different veterancy bonuses, upgrades, and abilities, which differentiate their DPS. Yes, picking up a weapon is often an upgrade over a standard rifle, but picking the wrong weapon can hurt the unit's scaling later on. For example, a Wedge 3 Gren would deal the same amount of damage as a Wedge 0 Gren when using a flamethrower, making it a 0% increase. If the unit does not scale about 50% better by Wedge 2, they become a liability, especially against the opponent's Wedge units. The DPS is a product of damage, accuracy, average fire rate, and other modifiers, such as damage mitigation, moving accuracy, receive accuracy, etc. If you go to the CoH3 stats benchmark tool, you can select a unit, then hover the mouse over the weapon to see its stats. The damage is a flat amount. The accuracy varies depending on the distance of the target. It is lower at longer distances. The average fire rate is a combination between several factors, including aim time, Y up, Y down, reload speed, reload frequency, burst fire rate, and burst duration. Each of them can roll high or low, which can substantially impact the fire rate. This becomes apparent in multi-entity unit, where each model's fire rate varies the longer they shoot. Why does this matter? Well, most of the veterancy bonuses are accuracy and fire rate, and using these three stats, we can make a table to see how much stronger units can become. So, how much stronger are the Wedge units? Typically, a unit deals more damage and becomes tankier as it gains veterancy. The interesting thing about this damage increase is that it becomes substantial at Wedge 2. Wedge 1 mostly unlocks abilities and improves the unit's survivability by about 10 to 20%. At Wedge 2, a unit typically deals about 20 to 50% more damage, and the damage increases to between 60 to 90% at Wedge 3. Upon a closer look, we see units don't scale equally. Most of the units scale up to about 60%, but some units almost double their DPS by the time they reach Wedge 3. However, scaling well doesn't always mean the unit has higher DPS. That also depends on the unit's base stats. For instance, the P-Gren now has the best Wedge scaling from their buff throughout patches, meaning their DPS at Wedge 3 is about 13, putting them at the same level as Wedge 0 elite SMG units, like the Rangers, but with mid-range drop-off. However, the Guards at Wedge 3 have close-range DPS that is twice as much as the P-Gren due to their extremely high base damage, despite having worse scaling. The main point here is units with better scaling perform better when using a pickup weapon. Let's say a Wedge 3 Mando picks up an MG34. The MG would have higher DPS compared to when a Wedge 3 P-Gren's using it. Additionally, the type of bonuses also matters. Most units gain a combination of accuracy and fire rate. However, some units only gain one of the two. If we look at Panzer Pio and Force Pio, we see the Panzer Pio only receives a fire rate increase. This matters because weapons like the flamethrower or the net launcher don't benefit from the increase in accuracy, making the fire rate increase more versatile. However, having the combination of both would result in higher damage as they are multiplicative. When it comes to survivability, units becomes harder to hit and gain HP and in some cases damage reduction as they weight up. There are layers before a unit takes damage in this game. First, there's the accuracy, which is this accuracy stat of the firing weapon, indicating the chance of the shot landing. Then, there's the target size, which is a modifier for the accuracy. Different unit types have a different target size. It is 1 for infantry, 1 1/3 for team weapons, and 16 and 20 for light and medium vehicles, respectively. Then, the harder to hit stat lowers the target size of the unit. Lastly, we have damage reduction, which reduces the incoming damage. Most units typically become tankier at weight 1 and weight 3. It's about 10 to 20% at weight 1 and increasing to about 50% at weight 3 compared to the base amount. However, the assault units gain survivability throughout 3 veterancies, and they usually become twice as tanky when they have reached weight 3. Overall, units can be about twice as effective, or even 3x in some cases, by the time they reach weight 3. This can completely change the unit's matchup, where a unit performs well initially and then gradually becomes much stronger as it gains veterancy. Let me show you. In this game, I noticed that my opponent has been building up his ranger blob, so I decided to go with a P-Gren and Stars combo, because I was certain that these two units would be able to keep up with the rangers at weight 3. The P-Gren can be available earlier than the rangers without giving up the tempo, and they also have a lower XP requirement, allowing them to gain veterancy faster than the rangers. The higher weight P-Gren will trade up with the ranger because they can choose when to fight. They can poke the rangers at longer range before deciding to close in and still be able to beat the rangers in CQB. However, once the rangers get to weight 3, the P-Gren will always lose to the rangers in CQB. But the weight 3 P-Gren can beat or deal significant damage to the weight 3 rangers if they try to Unga Bunga the P-Gren. This allows the stars to deal damage and not lose their models. Ideally, we want to end the game or keep wiping the rangers before they can get to weight 3. A few P-Grens again keeps the rangers away. The TLDR here is that Some units scale better than others, and units that scale better are not always stronger, because they have lower base DPS and toughness. Just look at the pure grains based stats. However, some units like the Stars and the Pathfinder scale well DPS wise, but their toughness doesn't scale very well. This unit can still be a great option when it comes to picking up weapons. The Grand Rangers, Paratroopers, and Foot Guards are the exceptions, where they scale extremely well overall. We can take advantage of the scaling to help us strategize on building up our army. The Rangers are not very cost effective at weight 0. However, they scale very well due to their veterancy bonuses, abilities, and sometimes the upgrades, aka the weapon drops. One strategy that I like to use is to delay the conversion of riflemen into Rangers. Ideally, we want our Rangers to be at least at weight 2 by the time of conversion. This requires 6000 XP. This means the rifle should be around halfway between weight 2 and weight 3. We can also optimize the process by using the captain's passive ability, which increases the experience gain of nearby infantry. Additionally, the ability is further enhanced when the captain is at weight 3. We want to keep the captain near our rifles at all times to boost the XP gain when they're in combat. Moreover, when the rifles are converted into Rangers, they gain experience equal to the accumulated amount of the rifle squad at that moment. Meaning, if the captain is nearby, they also receive a portion of that amount. Alternatively, if we want to skip the bar upgrade and use the Ranger's loot box ability early on, we can better allocate the randomized weapon from the loot crate. Unlike in other gacha games, everything in the Ranger's loot box is useful. That includes the M1919. One of the most common mistakes I often see is that people waste the M1919 thinking it's a downgrade for the Rangers. The M1919 is weaker than the other LMGs, but that should not be the way we look at it. Instead of comparing it to other LMGs, we should consider how much damage we need from our unit. Let's say we want our Rangers to have similar DPS to the Stars at long range. Everybody can agree that the Stars has an exceptional DPS, and when combined with the Rangers' Toughness, we can get a unit that can effectively outtrade the other units in the game. At weight 3, the Rangers have an advantage due to their scaling, and their abilities are easier to use compared to the Stars. Additionally, the M1919 is quite cheap, considering a loot box could drop 2 LMGs, and it only costs 90 munitions, whereas the other LMGs typically cost 100 munitions. So, Instead of wasting the LMG on the scout, we can give them to the rifles, which can be converted into ranges later on. This has been the video. I hope you find it useful and see you later.